I was a child has always been very difficult to describe. You know, since I was a child, I've been taught that Moray wines is a kind of good compromise between the wines of Chambol, the finesse of Chambol, and the tannin, the structure of Gevrey-Chambertin, which is in a way is true, but this is not really defining the typicity of Moray Saint-Denis wines. And Moray Saint-Denis is much more than this. And if you go back to the terroir of Moray Saint-Denis, Moray Saint-Denis is quite small in terms of superficie if you compare to its neighbor, Gevrey-Chambertin or even Chambol-Musigny. But this is the only really unique, only village in the Côte d'Or, in the whole Côte d'Or, where you have a continuous line from the north to the south of Grand Cru without any interruption. If you start from the Clos de la Roche down to the Bonnes-Mares. And if I would dare, I would say that it even goes above Clos de la Roche. And for me, Mazoyer and La Trissière should be part of Moray Saint-Denis, not in terms of AOC appellation, but in terms of characteristic of the wines. So for me, the wines of Moray Saint-Denis are really complex. And they're usually the expression of, tones of black fruit. You could feel, depending on the vintage characteristic, more or less blueberries, black currants. And this is comprised also of red fruits inside. I would say mainly probably cherry notes that you can pick in this wine. And so the core would be mainly black fruit, some touch of red fruit. And above that, you have all of the characteristic of Moray, which is their floral touch. Moray has probably is probably the best expression of floral touch, like violet, rose petal that you could find. And on top of the cherry, I would say, you have this expression of spiciness. So Moray wine are not just a good compromise between Chambol and Gevrey. This is something which is really totally different, has its own identity. And this is not by chance if, Bernard Arnault or François Pinault finally invested recently in Moray, in one of the two oldest estates of Burgundy. Moray Saint-Denis has usually been one of the oldest part of Burgundy, even if it was in the shadow of Chambol-Musigny and Gevrey-Chambertin. And so this is what I would say about Moray wines and the tradition of Moray, the very old tradition of Moray, I would say, mainly just basically.
Just to interrupt, I did forget earlier to introduce my very important colleague, Garrett. So, who is obviously totally unforgettable. So, evening, Garrett. Garrett's here wearing both his Flint and his sommelier hat, so he'll be asking, no doubt, a few pertinent questions about food matching and that sort of thing, and details of vineyards. And obviously, Garrett's style, making sure we crack on. So, Roland, just before we start with the first wine, and I think we're going to start with the youngest through to the oldest. Start with the 7. We've got 17 to kick off with. Where exactly is Lariot, and what characterizes it so much?
Yes, so Lariot is located in a very nice spot of Moray Saint-Denis. It's between Les Blanchards, Les Millandes, above the Clos Solon and just below the Clos Saint-Denis. So this spot of Premier Cru in Moray Saint-Denis is, I consider, one of the best locations of the Premier Cru of Moray Saint-Denis. And this is really great example of how the Moray wines character are tasting. If you take the Lariot, they more often show the characteristic of the black fruit side, having a good intensity in the floral notes like violet, as I said, and this spicy note, which is usually the characteristic of Lariot. From time to time, you may also have some chocolate notes, and this is quite some similar characteristic to the Mazoyer. In fact, this has the same typology of the Mazoyer in terms of soil. This is the soil of the Lariot is quite full of clay. Just underneath, you have a crinoidal limestone. So this is really more or less the same kind of soil and of the Mazoyer. And in Lariot, you have a wine that really have lots of flesh, that really needs time to really develop. And I would say that 15, 20 years ago, the tenants of Lariot were probably the one who used to be the most angulous among our all Premier Cru. But with the global warming evolution, I said that nowadays the tannins are very nicely refined, and the wines from Lariot has really capability of aging for a very, very long period. So at least 20, 30 years without any problem. And this is a vine that can really cope with the drought period that we faced over the different vintages, recent vintages, because of the clay, as I said. And in 18, for instance, or even 19, these were probably the nicest, the most beautiful vineyards among all our vineyards, because it's hardly stressed from water lack, and you could hardly see any yellow leaves in this vine. And despite the fact that this vine is very old, it has been planted after World War II by my grandfather. This is still a good, how do you say? This is still vigor. There's lots of vigor, and you still have to make quite severe pruning to try to keep the yield under control.
So Romain, the average age of your vines are 70 years in the Riot?
This is 70 plus, yes, year old for Lariot.
And can you talk about 2017 then, please? Everyone's tasting.
Okay. Yes. So 2017 was what was one of the earliest vintage we encountered, but we're getting quite familiar, and I think 2020 is going to be even probably the most earliest vintage that we would probably have to cope with. 2017, we started the harvest on the 8th of September, beginning of September, not the earliest, but beginning of September. And during the growing season, we hardly encounter any diseases problem. This was quite really a beautiful weather. We had some drought period in 17, and I do remember when the blossom came out, it was rather a little bit cooler and not really wet, but cooler. So we got lots of Millon in that vintage. So crop was quite high. And if you remember, because we're quite forgotten since a few years, but from 10 to 16, we lost about 3 crops during that period because of diseases problem, because of hail, because of frost. So 17 was one of the crop we started to have more wines, and my most fear in 17 was that the vintage came right after 16, when 16 can be regarded as sexy great vintage, one of probably of the benchmark vintage with 10, and my concern is that we were probably the lacking of some flesh intensity in that wine. But finally, when we make out the wine through the alcohol fermentation, you could feel that there was lots of transparency, lots of fruit characters, lots of flesh, density in the wines. The only thing is that you may expect a little bit more density in the wine, but this density came through right after the Merlot has been achieved. So once the Merlot has been achieved around March, then the wine started to get really volume, flesh, and now I'm really in love with the 17. You know, I feel that this is a very balanced wine, with generosity, and if you leave this wine brief, you know, it will reveal a lot of potential of purity and fruit characters. We're going to end with 07, I see on the list, and 17 and 07 are quite similar in character. They were both really early vintage. We started on the first in 07, 17 on the 8th, and they're both a lot of floral characters. This is really the characteristic of the vintage of 17. This has lots of expression of floral character. And if you think that Morey Premier Cru La Riotte, as this is its specificity of being quite floral, so this is going to be quite exuberant in terms of floral character. And that's, for me, this is a great sign of a vintage as well, because it adds some more complexity to a vintage. And I really like the 17 vintage. Right?
I think it's very nice. We've already had a question. How do you see the impact of COVID-19 for you in the wine business in 2020, and what do you expect in 2021? So sort of
how do I see the
impact of COVID-19 so far for you? And, that was a question from Marcus.
You know, we are not escaping from the rest of the world. So we, unless we have been we have not been confined, because we have been working in the vineyards. As I said, you know, nature is about 3 weeks to a month in advance this year. So we have to run in the vineyards. In terms of the probably commercial, your question was referring to the commercial, to the sales rather?
No, I think Marcus just said, what do you see the impact of COVID-19 for the wine industry in 2020? So just your view of how you potentially is probably the best way to answer that, I guess.
So it will have for sure an impact on the activity, on the sales, but you know, I'm not really upset about that, because you know, we produce wine that are really the ability to age for quite a long time, and this would not be any issue to keep those wines for quite a long time. And you know, over these days, we have been running to release more and more recently the vintages to face the demand. But I think that's quite good if we could release the vintage with a little bit more cellaring in our own cellar, you know. And I think that this would be a good point from that level. One of the good things is that we started to see that there have been some new order that is coming out from Asia. You know, a couple of weeks ago, we started to get some order from Hong Kong, notably. So it seemed that there seemed to be kind of development. I know that it would not be the same pace but it used to be pace that it used to be before the COVID-19 issue. I think it will probably take something at least like a year before we probably think of getting back to a normal situation. The main issue would be the on-trade, the restaurant, because this is probably the one who will face more issue. Thinking as well that, you know, they will be able to accept fewer people, so there's going to be some economical point at stake. And there are quite a lot of wine that are going through the on-trade, but I guess this would be also another way to change our distribution, and there would be more and more direct sales that could probably also be oriented directly to private people as well. So
you see, you see the impact more on the commercials than than you personally working in the vineyards and cellars and stuff?
Well, you know, it has not really changed anything. The only thing that was able to change is that we're able to take a little bit sometimes behind and take some reflection. And what I really have decided these days is to go more precisely in what I said, viticulture of precision. I have just hired a new guy. He just getting his diploma from an engineering school in agronomy, and he is also get a diploma in enology. And we have set up some guideline to set up a viticulture of precision. So it means that we try to work in a more precise way in the vineyards. And I think if we wouldn't have had the time to think about that, probably we would have been involved in the daily work and would not necessarily have the time to think about those issues and evolution. So that's a positive point from this situation. But clearly, we have not been personally, we didn't see any change in our daily life because we have been involved every day into the vineyards. Because, you know, as I said again, Mother Nature has been advanced for about three weeks to a month. I don't know if I really answer to your question, if this is the spirit of the question.
I think so. I can't find Marcus on other areas.
Yeah,
Marcus, you happy with that answer?
Yeah, that was really helpful. Yeah, many thanks for that. It was just like looking at the entrepreneur development in Bordeaux, and this is like messing up the whole process. I was just wondering whether this has a wider impact, and but you clearly mentioned some of the elements for that. So yeah, thanks very much for that insight.
Thank you, Marcus. And as we go on, if we can go on to the 2015, and while you're talking about the 2015, I've got a question from Daniel, who was asking about whole bunches and if you're using whole bunch in Lariat, and I suppose could you give us any of your opinions on whole bunches? But I think we'll do that whilst talking about 2015, which is a vintage that if you did make any bad wine, you potentially should go and do something else, I guess.
Sorry, I didn't catch the last part. So we're still not using any whole bunch. We still the same 100%. You know, that's my philosophy. I'm not saying that once I will not try, but we're still distilling anyway. So and for 2015, 2015 was a vintage that we encounter also very hot season, and we even have some berries that have been burned during that growing season. And the main issue in 15 was powdery mildew. You know, we've got quite high stress with that disease during 2015. But then finally, this is again a vintage when we started quite early the harvest, because we started on the 8th of September. And the vintage turned out to be, I would say, would resemble more to the 09 in terms of the tendency. This is what I called, if I would say a word in French, I would say gourmandise. This is a vintage that was really opulent. Everywhere across Europe, this was a beautiful vintage, from the regional level to the Grand Cru. And for vintages that usually are quite hot, you know, you reach quite a high quality on the lower appellations, such as the villages, because in terms of quality, you get finally a level of maturity of ripeness, which is usually very high and closer to the Premier Cru and the Grand Cru. So 15 was quite rich. My fear in that vintage is that we would probably lack a little bit of acidity, because, you know, we ended up with alcohol level that was ranging between 13 and 39. So it's still okay if you think of 18 or 19, but was quite higher than what we have been having before. And finally, we didn't lack a little bit of acidity from from when we collected the grapes to after the malo, because the level of the malic acidity was quite low. So finally, we end up with the level of acidity, which was quite nice. So the wine, despite being quite heavy, was still be able to be refreshed and balanced by the acidity. So I think this is a, yes, I don't find any other word that saying gourmandise vintage, which is gourmand.
Daniel's one question. Oh, sorry. If I could just ask one question, Roma, about the potential longevity of this wine and probably the 17 as well. The 17 was particularly open and delicious already. So my question was that do you think that will close up, or will it always stay that lovely? And then the 2015, there's a lot of density there. Is this wine you think will definitely close up? You talked earlier about Riot having a natural structure and a natural ability to age. Certainly the 15 indicates it should age very well.
I think 15, some of the wine are starting to shut down in terms of the 15s. As you know, it's I usually think that most of the vintage are going through a phase of shutting down, except the vintage that are considered to have a lighter structure. So should we consider that 17 would be lighter in terms of structure, would be lighter than 15, and would escape from getting closed to a closed period? Probably. The thing is, sometimes you can get wrong. I do remember when we had some expectation about 07 and 08. We thought that 07 would hardly close down, which was the case actually. 07 hardly closed down, so maybe 17 would hardly close down. But when we came to 07 was quite high in terms of acidity structure, and we also that it would take ages before the wine start to get to release, to get less compact, to be more integrated. But finally, 08 started to open up quite rapidly, sooner than we have expected. But it went through close phases anyway. So I think that 15 would, some of the wine are getting to a close period, but this is not so obvious as the wine is quite generous. There is a nice intensity, lots of fruit character and expression. So this is a vintage that you could still open the bottle and have pleasure with. This is not vintages like 02 or other vintages where whenever you open a bottle during the young period, you can hardly have any expression or any how do you say, any pleasure with the vintage,
Roma, when you start talking about 2014, we've got a question from James Nelly. Could you talk about your winemaking approach? So how much oak or oak aging, percentage of new barrels, I guess. Yeah, just in the winemaking, just talk about your philosophy there, and then we'll get back to James Nelly and see if they've got any questions on that.
Okay.
Also talking about 2014.
Yes. I usually define myself, as a lazy winemaker. So I'm not using any external, things like yeast, bacteria, enzyme, tannins, or whatsoever. I think that we have the chance in Burgundy to have various clima and the ability to produce wine which can have, authentic character. And I'm really the one who think that you should make all the best effort to make this authenticity and characters to come true, and the aging is it should be part of the reflection of all the philosophy. I can talk for about 2 hours just to describe what we're doing from the the vinification till the aging, but we don't have the time. I would be very brief. That's quite frustrating. That's, you know, basically what I'm doing is a cold sock that usually lasts for a period of between 7 and 9 days. And during the cold sock, the main thing is that we are trying to extract the polyphenols such as the flavor and the color. And we do once a day, I would say, some not punching down because the must is not formed, but we are stirring a little bit in the tank to ease the extraction of those polyphenols. And during the after 3 days, you know, I release the temperature control, and then usually the temperature climbs up to 15, where the alcohol fermentation starts. And then at this level, I'm rather hands off, but we do once a day punching down, once a day pumping over till mid of the fermentation. The second phase is very important to extract mainly the tannins. And I would say that till mid of the fermentation, I do once punching down, once pumping over, and then I'm doing more twice a day pumping over. I try usually not to go above 28 degrees in terms of temperature for the juice or the wine, just to be able to keep the freshness and the purity of the fruit. Whereas I try to reach about, you know, 32, 33 in the must to extract the most noble tannins. That's with some pumping over, might polymerize some of the tannins, so you will ended up with more silkier tannins. As for the aging, I'm using a very reasonable proportion of new oak, which is no more than 40% for the Grand Cru, 30% for the Premier Cru, 25% for the Village, and even 20% for the Village from the Côte d'Or. And since I would say 7-8 years, I'm only working on light toasting. Again, you know, the barrel should really emphasize the wine, and you should not really add any makeup to the wine if you want to keep it authenticity, espresso, and even if I'm really enjoying vanilla, I'm enjoying vanilla in the dessert, but not in the wine. So, you know, I'm really focused on this, and I'm still working on the selection of the wood, and still making experimentation with barrel makers and so on. So, just to talk about the 14. Sorry.
Thanks. We'll talk about 14. I just want to make sure James Nelly, we've got everything that they were asking there. Hi, James Nelly. Is that answered all your questions there about the oaks and things like that?
Yeah, that's super. Thank you very much. That's really, really great. Thank you.
Great. Thank you very much.
As for the
14, Romain.
Yes, as for the 14 vintage, the 14 was it was very nice. We had a very nice growing season in 14 till I would say July. Hardly have any pressure of diseases. Everything was quite under control in that vintage. But then finally in August was a nightmare. We started to have lots of, you know, rain. It was really a rainy month. And in 14 we have quite a nice crop. You know, we really had nice yield in 14. And I was almost crying at the end of August, because you could see that during the month of August, and usually you know that August is very important for the evolution of the ripeness of the fruit, and you could see that there was hardly any evolution of the ripeness in August in 14. And we have a double issue. We have the first issue coming out with some few outbreaks of rot that started to come out in the vineyards. And then we have a new thing after wild boar that came into 2012. We have this Suzuki issue, you know, this little fly that came and was making some leak in the berries. The berries were leaking, then the fruit was starting to ferment. And you know, when you were going to the vineyard, you could smell some vinegar, you know, because there was some fermentation that started, but there was no under control. So it's turning out into some vinegar. So, you know, by the end of August, we almost took the decision to divide by 2 the crop, to make it really to make it ripe and to collect ripe fruit by the end, because we know that getting back from the blossom, we're about 3 weeks from the final dates of the harvest. And then we were lucky because in September everything changed. You know, we had a northern wind that started to blow, and the few outbreaks of rot that were coming out started to dry. But I do remember in the first week of September, we have been going to the vineyards, and we have started to get rid of the grapes that have started to develop pourriture, root rot. Yeah. So we had to make work in the vineyard during the first week of September. But then from the first week of September till the harvest that happened on the 17th of September, we had a very nice weather. It was almost summer, and the evolution of the ripeness, which has been blocked before, has really evolved in a rapid way. But there was really still the Suzuki at stake. So there have been two options that growers took. Some of them really decided to harvest early, being afraid of the Suzuki issue and rot problem. And those who took a little bit more time trying to get more ripeness into the fruit, but risking of losing part of their crop. I was part of the second one, and I think that in 14 we came out with a great vintage. You know, the first vintage that came into my mind after 6 months was 78. 78 is a brilliant vintage in Burgundy. And I think that 14 is going to be a vintage that within some times we're going to think, wow, this is really gorgeous. And this has everything, you know, density, acidity, so the support for the wines to be very fresh. And I think this is a lovely vintage.
Romain, another question from Adrian. He was talking about the drinking windows for your wines. We've been mentioning, you know, different drinking windows for different wines. He's saying, do you think the best drinking window for the Lariat is 10 to 15 years, or is it impossible to generalize because of different vintages? Yeah, do you want to just, what do you think?
It's always a difficult question to answer. First, it depends on your habits, on the season where you're drinking the wine. I would say basically, you know, I was educated to drink old wine when I was a child, and then I'm more keen on drinking younger vintages. And I would say that I'm drinking more old wines, old vintages during wintertime, when you can pair all this wine with richer food that you're having during winter. Whereas in springtime or fall time or even summer, when you need to be more refreshing, you need more acidity, then you may drink so younger vintages. And what the young vintages has the ability to show nice, purely fruit. So you can really enjoy this fruit character when the wine is very young, but you can also wait for, so the first phase would be within the first 3 to 4 years. And then you can wait another period, which would be from 7 to 15 years when you still have nice fruit intensity, but the one which has started to change, develop some more complexity, and then would be more intricate and the acidity as well, or even wait for another extra 10 to 15 years if you have the ability to wait.
So, Romain, the question, I guess you're saying that at least wait 5 years minimum for Lariat, but it can age for 15, 20 years if people have got the patience?
You know, recent vintages, you can probably enjoy them, start to enjoy them having on the fruit quite young.
Just bring Adrian in.
If you want probably to take the more benefit of this wine and get its complexity, yeah, sure. I would say that you would probably have to wait, say like 8 to 10 years minimum.
Thank you. That's fascinating, particularly winter versus summer, which I hadn't thought about before. But I think the winemaking gets better and better in Burgundy, so the wines are lasting longer and longer.
Yes, I think this is, you know, the benefit of this global warming evolution is that we are now really able to make wine that are able to be drunk very, very young. You know, it's not it does not happen at the time of my father. You really needed at that time to wait at least 7 to 8 years because the talents were, quite tough. And we say to drink a Burgundy, you should wait at least 7 to 8 years before getting some pleasure. But nowadays, this is not true anymore. You can really have pleasure in drinking wine, which are quite young, having it on the fruit side. But the structure and the tannin would be really nicely refined, so it won't be any drawback for enjoying the wine.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Roman, while you're discussing 2013, I've got a question from Owen about the impact you expect going forward on your vineyards from climate change. And is 2015, which was obviously a solaire, a sunny vintage, reflective of the style you would expect to be most common in the future. So while talking about 2013, just talking about climate change, how you're seeing that, and do you think 2015s will be that style of vintage with sun, with heat, will be more common in the future? And then obviously talk about 2013, which was not a hot, sunny vintage, but yeah.
I'm sure you all remember 13 vintage as well. It was the year of flooding. I don't know if you remember, there was lots of flooding in London as well. And flooding happened in Burgundy. And I do remember it lasts for at least 5 to 6 months. So we're not really able to go into vineyards with any tractor in March, April, because it was so, it has rained so much. Then, in some cases, the piece of wood was really underwater and some feet were really underwater. So it was that bad. So we started with a vintage that was really delayed by this flooding that happened in springtime. And this is why, the growing season started late. And this is why we ended up with late harvest, one of the latest harvests over the last 20 years. And, if it was not really, if it was quite common to harvest beginning of October, I would say 30 years ago, this is not anymore the case nowadays. So 2013 was quite an exception among the last decades. And I would say that if we manage throughout that vintage to take the disease under control. The only thing as the harvest was delayed, in September, August, you have less light. So the photosynthesis process has been decreased. And I think in 13, to make the great and exceptional vintage, you would have need to probably get more few days before harvesting. But there was some issue about the weather. There have been some rain that happened during the harvest. And I think we managed to harvest a very satisfactory level of ripeness for the vintage. But if we would have some extra days, we would probably really benefit from it. In terms of the wine expression, I think 13 remained quite closed, remained quite shut down for a while and shut down quite rapidly. And this is a vintage that started to open up really especially for the village wine. You just open, the bottle and the wine start to sing already. Whereas for the level of Premier Cru and Grand Cru, I think you should be a little bit more patient. And if you want to enjoy this vintage, which now start to be really beautiful, you need to open the bottle quite early in advance. So you don't have to hesitate to open the bottle, let's say 3 or 4 hours before, or even, taste part of the bottle and keep it for the next meal. And you will really enjoy the wine. There will be still lots of fruit character in the wine, and there will be nice density. There's not weight on this vintage as well.
Roman, to Owen's question, in terms of the climate change, so you mentioned picking dates are probably about a month earlier than they were 20 years ago in general. I suppose flowering dates have moved forward as well from that. But it's not all good news, and that I suppose there's been more instances of late frosts and hail and all those kind of things we've seen the last 10 years. So it's kind of climate change is not just warmth. There's other factors. I'm just trying to help to answer Owen's question, I guess.
Yes, it's quite a complex question because, you know, the first thing that you really see is that there is an evolution in terms of the temperature. So temperature is really a key factor. You can really see that there have been an evolution in terms of the temperature during summer overall. And so this is the first thing. The second thing is that the global warming is coming up with also a lot of, how would you say, intempéries in French. How do you translate that in English? You know, extreme condition. You know, that is coming out. So you know, in 16 we've got frost on the 27th of April. In 17, we hardly escaped from it. Part of the Côte de Monde really had some problem with the frost in 17. If you think of the hail that happened between 12 to 14 in the Côte de Monde, there have been hail three years in a row. You could not figure out that it could exist. So, you know, the global warming is coming out with also a lot of extreme conditions that can really damage the growing season or can give us lots of nightmares. But finally, if you are able to manage all this disease problem and can escape from the hail or the frost, then you can see that in terms of the harvest time, you've probably gained about 3 weeks on the average from 20 years ago. And, you know, I just mentioned earlier that this is probably the earliest, we have never been such in advance in 20 into the vineyards. You know, the blossom for the American feta started about 10 days ago. 10 days ago. So we're going to have the blossom, the full blossom would happen next week. You know, and today is quite rainy. You know, we are at the Saint-Glace, last day of the Saint-Glace, and it's quite cold. But next week is going to be quite going back to more normal, about 20, 22 degrees, and it's going to be quite sunny. So I think there's going to be the nature is still going to be ahead, and we're probably going to harvest between 20 of August and the end of August, if there is no concern or no issue about disease problem or hail or whatsoever. So, you know, from what we have seen, the indicator of when we saw the harvest is a good sign of how global warming situation has evolved. But
Thanks,
yeah.
Owen, is that covering all your question there?
Yeah, very interesting. Thank you very much.
I have much more to say about that, but I know that we have only 10 minutes left. So
Also a passionate topic of mine, but for another day.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So Romain, then moving into the 2012, I guess, to discuss the 2012 vintage.
Oh, 2012 or 2011?
12?
12.
Oh, 12? Okay, sorry. 2012 is a vintage that we had lots of problem in the vineyards. We encountered lots of problem with mildew and then powdery mildew later on. Mazoyères, just to give you an idea, Mazoyères Chambertin is so well exposed that we hardly feel any mildew issue, whatever the vintage. But in 12, I do remember I had to make 13 treatment in the vineyard. You know, it was like you were it was always humid with a high temperature, so ideal for the mildew. And in 12, we lost about 25% the crop on Mazoyères. I do remember in the Aligoté, everything was perfect on a Friday, and then when I came and visited the vineyards just on the morning, all the grapes has been covered by mildew. you know, it was so rapid. So the vintage in 12 was really problematic from the management of the disease issue, especially when you're farming organically, because you don't have that level of security as if you work with using some chemical products. And I would say we ended up with quite low yield, with lots of miron, and this is a vintage which is for me quite sexy.
What treatments can you use when you're organic?
To fight against mildew, this is copper mainly. Copper, yes.
Just I'm sure that people might.
Just to counteract that, though, I suppose the danger if you have a lot of rain and you have to keep redoing the copper treatments, and there is a danger that you can end up, I guess, leaving quite a lot of copper in the soil.
Exactly.
Which,
you know,
and I gather it takes a long time for the copper to come out of the soil.
And now even they have decided to reduce, which is normal, the level of copper to 4 kilo per hectare per campaign. And you know, I'm quite proud to farm organically, but I'm not so happy by using copper. But if someone would find another alternative than using copper, I would be very happy. But it is still a metal, and you would still find this metal in the vineyards. This is not really completely satisfactory, but you know, this is the only product that we can use to fight really mildew, farming organically or biodynamically.
I mean, as you touched on climate change this evening, do you think it's going to become more difficult to remain organic as the climate changes, or do you think actually vines that are organic will have greater strength and be able to adapt to the changing climate?
That's a good question. The thing is that if the global warming is mainly giving us drought period during summertime, as we encountered in 19, in 18, quite 17, then this should not be a great issue when you farm organically, because we're more sensitive overall to mildew pressure than to powdery mildew, because we're really able to struggle to fight in a more efficient way against powdery mildew with sulfur. And so I think if the direction of the global warming is this way, we'll be able to manage it in a better way. But there are other questions behind. Is the balance of the wine, because you know, I think a wine should be balanced, and the acidity is one of the key elements. I think our main issue nowadays is not to produce or to harvest ripe fruit. Everyone is able to collect ripe fruit, which was not the case 20 years ago. We were almost collecting underripe fruit, you know. And the main concern nowadays is to make wine that are still very fresh, balanced, digest, so that it has the balance with the acidity and all its potential alcohol and all its volume. And I would say that in 19 we've probably started to reach one of the limits. You know, this is and I would say that there is an issue as well when it's come to be a drought period, when it's very hot. You can also use sulfur in a very limited way, because you know, sulfur can burn the leaves as well. You know, the sun can burn the leaves under the action of sulfur as well. So it's becoming a little bit problematic. We have less and less, I would say, ability to solve those pressure, but we are still able to do that. I don't know precisely what's going to be the future, but I would say in another way, we have never been making so beautiful wine overall into those recent vintages. So this is quite encouraging as well.
Yeah. Before we move on to the final wine, Garrett and I recently discussed red Burgundy vintages in the past decade, and we each put our favourite 3 vintages in order. Which would be your 3 favourite vintages from 2010 up to today?
Well, it's
silver, gold.
It's like saying which one you prefer the most, and then I would say try to be really. I would say 10 and 16 are probably 2 of the benchmark. Still, I think we've got so many beautiful wines across this last decade, so it's really hard. They are all quite beautiful. There are some weaker vintages, but they have all their different characteristics, but they are quite nice. I would say 10, 16. 18, just behind 17, 12.
It's pretty much everything, really. What I would say, just before we move on to the last wine, is I think on tasting this evening, for me, the wine, I thought 13 was terrific. And whereas I felt the 14 was just beginning to close down.
Yeah.
I thought the 13 was just beginning to pop its head above and show its top. And actually, its precision and purity was terrific. And I think, I thought it showed very well. But if we can, so this is the most mature wine we have. Sadly, we have none for sale, but we thought it would be interesting to look at something with a little bit of age. If you could talk about 2007, Roman.
Yes. 2007 was the vintage where we started to have no winter. So by the beginning of April, the growing season was quite in advance compared to what we've registered before, almost like 03, and we had nice weather condition throughout 07. We didn't have any peak of high temperature during that vintage. The growing season was going normal. We had some rain and some of the little concern about mildew, but we're able to solve it in a good way. And 07 was quite of the earliest vintage because we started on the 1st of September in 07. And this was a vintage having not a high level of acidity, but there was a nice, I don't like to use this term, but minerality support behind. And this minerality, this expression that you have was really putting all the fruit forwards. And you have a great expression of, as I said, like 17, of floral touch. You know, it was mainly some peony, floral, white floral touch that you could feel, and some spiciness as well. And I do remember it was matching really nicely and perfectly in Lariat. And this is, again, I do remember, this is a vintage that few countries really was not really ready or keen on having because of Bordeaux image at the time. But then nowadays, a lot of people are really, I wouldn't say dying, but would really be lacking to have any 07 to enjoy and to drink. And even if this is not a vintage, there are lots of flesh or weight, and if you compare to a 7, but this is really a great balance, a great expression, and this is like kind of perfume wine as well. And I do remember 3 years ago I had made a comparison between the 07 and 08. The 08 was really opening up more rapidly. The 07, it really took a while before the 07 started to come out. So this is a vintage that was probably not as structured as some counterpart like 06 or 08, but this is a vintage that aged beautifully, that will have a long ability to age, and that you would really, to take the most of it, need to make him some aeration, and the wine would really develop with some oxygen. I'm really happy with the 07.
It's stunning, Romain.
Thank you.
I love 07s, and I remember people saying that 07 was a restaurant vintage, and saying that it wasn't going to be one for the collectors. Or I just thought the wines were fantastic across the board, and yeah, for sure there was not that structural element that you would get maybe with some of the other more vaulted vintages, but and even now still very much in the game and giving so much pleasure. So it's yeah, bravo.
One last question for Romain, slightly frivolous, but if someone handed you 25 million euros tomorrow, which vineyard would you try and buy?
That won't get you very much, Jason. You know, maybe make it 50 million euro or something.
If I would buy, or would be offered?
Because obviously you've got vineyards in Chevry-Chambertin, Louis Saint-Jean.
Yes, you know
is there one you would love to get your hands on?
Yes, of course. We don't have any vineyards in Vosne-Romanée village, in the village of Vosne-Romanée. Though, if I could have some nice small Grand Cru of Vosne-Romanée, I would be happy to deal with that. Sure.
A little bit of Richebourg or something, Romain.
Exactly. this was a name I had in mind, but yes, some Richebourg, why not? It could be very nice.
And perhaps one
but you know something which is very, very interesting as well is with the global warming, is that you could see that there have been some of the village that are really benefit from the evolution. Like if you think of Montly, Océ-Durès, village around Chassagne, or even Fissin, Marsanais, they are all really benefit from the evolution of global warming. And if you say, just inside our property as well, you could see that in hot vintages, La Combe d'Orvaux is probably suffering more, whereas Belair would benefit more from the evolution of global warming. Whereas in a cooler vintage, probably La Combe d'Orvaux would benefit more from Belair. So you could see some even evolution into the vineyards, but there are also some villages that really benefit from the evolution as a whole, I would say.
Well, yeah, one last question. We touched briefly on 2020 and how that's a few weeks in advance. 2019, none of us have had the chance to come out and taste. And we're not quite sure when we'll be able to, hopefully soon. Can you give us any positive news on 2019?
Yes, this is a vintage. I found in 19 we ended up with quite high level of alcohol as well, even higher than some 18 actually, but you can hardly feel it. I don't remember when you came and taste some of the 18, and then when I told you that some of the 18 were just above 14, you could hardly realize, because there was such nice balance, and the wine was so digested that you could hardly feel any level of warmth and I think the 19 as again a good expression of purity, fruit. This is more fruit driven than 17, as I said previously, and and the wine so far, most of the Malo has been achieved. Just few cuvées that the Malo is on but not finished. You can feel really a nice balance, and the wine is not the acidity of the 14, but you can really enjoy the at this level. So I'm really happy with the 19, how far they are going so far. But I think it's going to be interesting to taste in next November.
Jason, just quickly as well, the whole way through the tasting, I was imagining myself having some medium rare venison or some lovely duck breast, or the whole way through I was thinking of game, and I was thinking of, yeah, definitely some things like duck or these kind of dishes. And what's your go-to dish for a glass of Riot?
Sorry, I didn't get it.
What's your favorite food and wine match for, if you're having a glass of Lariat 07, what would you be? I was thinking about a nice juicy piece of duck breast. What would you have?
I don't have any Riot 07 with me so far, but I would probably go with some roasted duck.
Duck as well.
Yeah, some roasted duck could be nice pairing. Yeah, on barbecue.
We're getting lots of positive feedback from some of the Frank and Jim and Adrian and others and Daniel. But thanks to everyone for joining us. And hopefully see you at another one of these webinars, the new normal of wine testing. Cheers, everyone.
Cheers to everyone.
Enjoyable. Thank you. Delicious. Lovely. Lovely.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Romain. That was terrific. We'll be having to badger you to try and find some more 2007 probably, because I think you might get a few emails saying, have we got any more? And we haven't got any. So find some more in your cellar, let us know. But I think if anyone is interested, just from the sales pitch, I think we have some 13 or 14. I think they are available, but I think
we're going to be drinking the O2 with our dinner.
I'm just about
Lucky
ready.
you are.
So thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you to everyone. And